Live from the Little Park Media Studios in Wellesley, Massachusetts, this is In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. Today we talk about the legality of cannabis with a gentleman who was one of the co-authors of Question 4 in 2016 that paved the way for legalization in adult use marijuana here in Massachusetts. He works for Vicente Cederberg. See, when it counted, I got it right. Valerio Romano is his name. My name's Jimmy Young. Don't go away. We've got a great show coming up next. Don't look now, but it's a whole new world of weed out there. Pot is flower. It's Bruce Banner and Blue Dream. You've got bongs and dabs, resin and shatter, vaping and edibles, new terms, new strains, and new ways to use cannabis sativa, the plant. Some just made with CBD, and hemp has minimal THC. There's sativa and indica strains and 100 chemicals, all legal in 10 states for adult use. There's a lot to get to know. Get used to it, folks, because it's legal in the Bay State and it's not going away. Neither is In the Weeds with Jimmy Young next. Revolutionary Clinics is just one of 49 medical cannabis dispensaries in Massachusetts, but there's a reason why it's one of the most popular. It's their patient-first philosophy. All day long, they teach, they educate, they communicate about this complicated plant called cannabis sativa. That's true whether you visit their Cambridge location in Fresh Pond at 110 Fawcett Street or at 67 Broadway in Somerville. Revolutionary Clinics, where the patient comes first. All right, welcome to In the Weeds with Jimmy Young on the Go2CMN network. This, of course, is a video recording that is streaming live on the Cannabis Multimedia Network. It will also be available as a podcast on our flagship group. That would be clnsmedia.com. It'll also be available on Spotify and iTunes and Audio Boom. And yes, this is a video recording, and we post this video recording also on our friends theweedtube.com website. And we have a very special guest in studio, Valerio Romano, which is a fantastic name.
Thanks, Jimmy.
I'm guessing it has something to do with Italy?
I was born in Italy, yes.
Where in Italy were you born?
In Rome.
That is so cool. When you get to say place of birth, you get to put in Rome, Italy?
Yeah, that's right.
That is the coolest. Newark, New Jersey, Rome,
Newark.
Italy. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I get
Jersey's
it.
not bad. Come on.
Well, let me put it this way. My parents gave me Newton, Massachusetts at age 4. It was one of the best presents I ever got.
Jersey's ahead in the cannabis market. I mean, Jersey's coming forward now, hopefully.
Well, we will certainly be talking about New Jersey because I think that they had an opportunity and they blew it.
To the extent that I have answers, yeah. I'm mostly focused on Mass, but we can, yep.
Not only are you focused on Mass, but your whole practice at Vicente. How did that come about?
Yeah, that's right. So we're a national law firm with offices in L.A., Denver, and Boston. We recently opened a Jacksonville office and a New York office opening now. The founding partners, Brian Vicente and Christian Cederberg, and Josh Capel, the third one of the early partners, participated and advocated for and helped devise Amendment 64 in Colorado, which ended cannabis prohibition in Colorado.
Gotcha.
They continue, and so they run the Denver office, Brian and Christian.
Did the Boston office exist before Question 4?
Yes, we were doing medical, but I wasn't with Vicente Cederberg.
Okay.
I had my own law firm, and in the last few years they absorbed my little firm, like the Borg, and I became a partner in this national firm. So there's 8 of us who run it. We have about 80 employees around the country.
And it's all focused on cannabis, and you're...
That's it.
And you were one of the co-authors of Question 4, which paved the way. First of all, how did you get picked for that honor, if you will?
Well, I mean, our firm, and we write laws and regulations. We advocate for them, and then we get licenses and we keep them compliant. And I had been working with VS, although I wasn't a VS attorney, when the Marijuana Policy Project came, and I had been very successful in the first round of medical applications. Mm-hmm. I got the very first special permit for any cannabis use in Massachusetts in November of 2013, actually.
Right, and I got my card in February of the first year
of
it was
14.
Available. Yeah, 14.
Yep.
Right.
And so we've been working closely with host communities and applicants, and I won 4 of the first 12 licenses, and so I was a known entity. So when the Marijuana Policy Project came into Mass to end prohibition, I was one of the natural choices. And Adam Fine, my partner, and other folks, my law partner, and other folks were part of that drafting team. It was definitely a collaborative effort.
Nice. And it worked. You got to yes, even though I think the vote was 53 to 47%. Or
yeah, it was about 3. It was about 3 point. About 3 points that we won by 6 point spread.
But now it's over 60%.
Yeah,
just for the record.
Well, nationwide, it's moving. To more and more.
CBS just made out a poll 65% for legalization.
But it's interesting during the drafting of Question 4. Sort of the fundamental conflict in the room was, everybody was an anti-prohibitionist who was in the room, right? There was, but some people want to just sort of free cannabis, treat it like lettuce. And other people, realize that that's never going to pass in Massachusetts. You need to have tight controls. I joke around about Massachusetts being this progressive Puritan place, and after just being here for a few years, I already knew at that point that we really needed to have a tight law, and so that was really the conflict in drafting this whole thing, was how to make it so it would pass but still satisfy what we're trying to do with the law.
Right, and it was written in a very interesting way. And again, I am no legal mind. I have played it on television before, but I have no legal mind. And looking back now at the last 22 weeks since November 20th, when it opened officially up in Cultivate and in Netta in Northampton, they've sold over $80 million worth of cannabis in this state. A lot of people think it took way too long to get to this point. Now that we're here and now you're looking back at it, has the rollout been as you expected, like more of a controlled rollout, or would you have liked to have seen them actually get this going a little bit earlier? And I know there was a Department of Public Health versus the Cannabis Commission ruling. I get that.
Yeah, if we're talking about adult use only and not medical, which sounds like that was the basic.
Yes, that was the basic question. Yep.
Yeah. So, the Cannabis Control Commission, the 5 commissioners are in a tough spot. First of all, 4 out of the 5 of them voted against the law that they're regulating. I think they've all come around and they see what they're doing and they've embraced it and they're positive about it. But they did vote against. It's kind of like Trump's cabinet. They're against the agencies that they regulate. And so that's the first thing. And then, like we were talking about, this really Puritan sort of, conservative mind frame when it comes to cannabis in Massachusetts. They've really had to step lightly. I don't blame the commissioners for really being thoughtful about every step. Now, I would love to see, the process roll out more quickly. But cannabis is everywhere anyway. There's all these different arguments people have about why, we talk about security and adolescent drug use and all these different things. But I think the best argument for why we want to tax and regulate cannabis is that it's everywhere anyway. So
I want to know where it came from.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I want to know where it came from, who touched it, or did they even touch it? Because I've seen them in the growers with their uniforms and all their screens and their plastic, So again, the question is, it's here now. It is, you walk around Boston, you smell it. People know that it's legal. And for years, of course, it was part of the counterculture because guess what? You smelled it then too, just not as much as you do now.
Yeah, I don't know if I smell it more or less now. One of the things that we need to get going are on-site consumption and social type lounges so that people have a place to use cannabis. If you're going to legalize it, other than just their own homes. So that's part of the law that we wrote, and that will hopefully start happening in the next year or so. So cannabis is everywhere anyway. So I'd like to see the rollout, happen efficiently. But I understand the sort of the pickle that the regulators are in. They want to do a few fundamental things. They want to make sure that, a super important part of the law and the rollout of the law was sort of equity provisions of helping, communities that were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And so the commissioners are trying to keep that in mind. And as they do the rollout, they're also trying to make sure that that there's no unfair opportunities for companies that are large with more capital, and there's sort of a conflict there, and it's a difficult role. So they're in a tough spot. But I mean, they're doing their best. I know they're working hard. They're also sort of hamstrung by the open meeting law. So the 5 commissioners really have to delegate the work, and they can only meet and deliberate with a quorum if they notice it. And so they can't just go issue licenses on a Tuesday morning. You know, they have to duly notice it and meet and vote on it in public, and so that makes it difficult for them as well.
Interesting, yeah. That I didn't know, so I've already learned something, and I appreciate that. You mentioned the social equity provision in the law. I visited Caroline's out in Uxbridge over 420. I thought that would be a kind of a symbolic thing to do on 420, and got to meet Stephen Frankel. And Caroline, unfortunately, was sick at the time, but they were a social equity applicant. She did all the work. She filled out all the forms, except for I think a few, but it's a remarkable story that she did not have to go through what a lot of people keep telling those who want to get into the business. You must have at least $1 million of capital before you even start the process. She did not. And she just opened up a little store and filled out the paperwork and qualified.
Well, I mean, I
probably simplified that.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, so under the medical law, you were supposed to be able to show $500,000,
right?
And the medical is $31,500 to apply, and then another $50,000 due within a month of your getting provisional registration. And medical still has that. They really need to take the medical regulations and make them in line with adult use, which is more efficient. That being said, I don't work with them, so I don't know exactly what happened. But presumably they got a provisional license and then went and raised money, because building out security. I know Uxbridge very well. I'm actually opened up Uxbridge to this whole use. I met with the selectmen before anybody else did. I've been working in and out of Uxbridge for a long time, but presumably they raised money after they got a provisional license before they were open. I mean, one of the big things in Massachusetts in opening any of these is security. Commissioner Flanagan will say, unapologetically, look, this is not cheap to do, because you're going to have to spend a significant amount of money on all the camera footage you need and backups and for 90 days, and all the security that one needs to open one of these things is very expensive. Uxbridge has a lot of advantages as to why you want to be there that make it less expensive, but it depends really on the use too. So opening up a dispensary, there's a lot of security, there's a vault, there's that sort of thing, but you're not building out a grow, right? Building out 20,000 square foot of indoor cultivation in Massachusetts is millions of dollars no matter what.
Correct.
And so yes, they probably did it efficiently.
They get their product, their flower, wholesale through the medical people who are growing it, and wherever else they can get it legally that have a license.
Well, I don't work with them, so I don't know exactly.
Well, this is what he told me.
Yeah, so they don't get it.
I'm going out on a limb saying I'm basing it on fact on that.
Yeah, if they don't have a medical license, I mean, just to get into the weeds a little bit.
I like that. Did you do that on purpose?
Sorry, I mean, there's so
I
many.
love that.
We can hash this out if you want. If they don't have medical and adult use, which they don't, they're just adult use dispensary. Then anybody they buy it from via wholesale has to have an adult use license as well as medical. They were growing under medical.
So it's a twofer for sure.
Yeah, but if you were, just to get into the detail, but if you are co-located adult use and medical, you can buy medical and then convert it to adult use at the point of sale. And so it's a little tricky, but in their case, they're buying it from folks that have adult use cultivation licenses.
Right.
Now, the cost of wholesale cannabis in Massachusetts is incredible. I mean, $3,600 plus a pound for flower, and it's going up. $1,500 a pound for trim. $20 to $45 a gram for extracts, live resin and whatnot, being extremely expensive. It's just so much higher than any of the West Coast states that people are used to thinking about, California and Oregon, and that's because the difficulty in production here.
Right, you got to be indoors for the most part.
I mean, I think the hybrid greenhouses are going to start rolling out. The Freetown project is permitted for 1 million square feet, and they started construction.
Explain that one for us.
Well, American is a publicly traded national company, and their first tenant is Basque Inc., which is in Fairhaven. They're one of the early dispensaries that were open. Fantastic grower, and their first tenant. But they have 1 million square feet permitted in Freetown, and they're going to build it out for tenants, and we'll see exactly how the prohibition on having excess of 100,000 square feet of cultivation winds up working with the Cannabis Control Commission of Canopy.
One of the interesting developments, you mentioned California, and of course they've had it and for a little over a year for adult use, but they've had medical for a long time, and it's been part of the culture in California. You grew up in California?
I did.
But L.A., not Humboldt County, right?
Well, I went to...
didn't even know what Humboldt County was until before NECAN, but that's another story.
I went to undergrad and law school in San Francisco.
Gotcha.
And practiced criminal defense there, and definitely worked in Humboldt as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Strange place.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've read recently that 80% of the legal market in the United States comes out of Humboldt County, California.
Of the legal or illegal?
Illegal.
I mean, that might be an accurate statistic. Although things are changing since legalization in California.
Right.
The non-licensed grows are getting shut down. These properties are not being used anymore. So it's definitely changing.
And what has happened so I'm using that as an example because here in Massachusetts, we now know that it's adult use, recreational is legal once you get all the licensing and you get your permitting and you get your host agreement in place. But what's happened, at least this is what's being reported, is that the illegal market has actually gone up, even though the whole point of legalization is to control that. So is that a factor because of the slow rollout of the dispensaries, you think? Or why do you think the illegal market actually has gotten a boost in their distribution? Is it because of simple supply, demand, and cost?
You know, I mean,
I'm asking your opinion. I understand.
You're telling me that the illegal market or the non-licensed market.
Non-licensed market.
Yeah.
I like that better.
Yeah.
And I don't like the color they use
Yeah.
either on the other one. So
yeah, the non-licensed market. I hadn't heard that it was going up. Perhaps there's more reporting because the overall acceptance of cannabis has become greater. So people are more willing to talk about where they get cannabis and whatnot. And so, but I hadn't heard that the non-licensed market is increasing post ending of prohibition and the opening of these. So I would probably attribute it more to better fact finding than actually more illegal production and
coming into the state.
Well, that's a whole other issue. You know, bringing cannabis in from outside of the state, but you know, any amount of cannabis is illegal under federal law.
Right.
So you know, this whole red herring of crossing state lines with cannabis is really a red herring, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because the feds can bust you for having a joint in your pocket, whether you're in state or not, legal or not, and so. And a lot of news reporting gets that wrong. There was a story last night on Channel 4 that talked about, you know, crossing interstate lines with cannabis as being illegal under federal law, but as some special it's all illegal under federal law.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's a complicated issue, though, and I get
it
why
is.
people
And Great Barrington out there has a shop, and I've read this in the Globe. Who, again, I think the Globe has a great cannabis reporting division. I'm hoping to be working with them at some point.
Has Dan Adams been on your show?
Dan hasn't because he's been so darn busy. But I'm working with Naomi and Felicia and a few others over there.
Naomi's wonderful. I don't know if I know Felicia.
She's doing the daily. They're doing a daily rip. A daily rip now.
Okay.
So by all means, subscribe to that too,
Yeah.
because it does keep you up to date on what is going on. But what I was saying is they reported out of Great Barrington that 70% of their sales are out-of-state sales. And that shouldn't surprise anybody who knows a map.
The problem is if the cannabis that's being bought is going back out of state, or if people from New York are coming here to consume it.
Well, they're coming here to buy it. Let's talk about that first. And Massachusetts ends up getting those taxes from those out-of-state residents.
Well, so there's no prohibition on people from out of state coming to buy cannabis in Massachusetts.
Right.
So there's not. I mean, other than the regular federal illegality, there's no prohibition on that. I mean, that's why the New England states are scrambling to now get some sort of adult use market in the other states as well, because they don't want Massachusetts to win out on all the money.
Do you think that's happening at the federal level too? Because you've got Mexico and Canada on either side of the United States for the most part. Is that one of the factors that's moving the green wave in Washington,
Yeah,
D.C.?
well, we have the States Act, which our firm is committed to, and Christian Cederberg is on the board of the organization that meets in D.C. to push it forward.
Is that the NCIA?
No, not NCIA. It's Elizabeth. Well, the folks who started the States Act was Elizabeth Warren and Cory Gardner and they couldn't have two more opposite politicians, right? Cannabis is a great.
Pretty much everybody's opposite Elizabeth.
Yeah, well, a lot of ways, but cannabis is like one of the only issues anywhere that really brings people together, right? You have McClintock and Polis or had, you have. Gardner and Warren, you had Blumenauer and Rohrabacher, these politicians who couldn't be more different are united on cannabis. Yeah. And so I think we're, now that the House has, doesn't have Pete Sessions who blocks any the rules. No, Pete.
Pete. Well, that's right.
Yes,
that's
he didn't allow any cannabis legislation to really get discussed and come out of the committee. And so now that that's over, we expect and hope, for safe banking and the States Act to go through. I mean, you just saw our Attorney General Barr, spoke about positively about the States Act in the last few days. It was funny when we passed Question 4 in 2016. We had a party for it at Lear in the Back Bay, and it was the same night of the presidential election. It was interesting, sort of bittersweet for those of us of a certain political bent.
Right.
But I was very happy that Question 4 passed after having spent a year and a half plus on working on it. But at Lear in the Back Bay of Boston is not exactly a haven or a den for conservatives. Mm-hmm. But, that party was half conservative type people because cannabis just attracts those people. So I don't and then another example is Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary. Yep. Talks about the importance of having access to banking as a safety issue, right? So all these people that you normally think are sort of conservatives or whatever they call them, whatever they are nowadays, are actually still proponents for a thoughtful legalization of cannabis.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's because that side of things has always been very concerned about how much money they have in their pocket and what's going to happen next. A lot of people, as you know, in this country do vote with their pocketbooks. And what's going to be best for my family or what's going to be best for me tends to sway a vote one way or another. And again, this is my opinions because, after all, it's my show and I get to do opinions. It's just the beauty of being a talk show host. I really do believe that there is far more money invested on the cannabis side by Americans in various businesses now than perhaps any other, certainly new business over the last 10 years. When money is invested, it tends to push politicians, doesn't it? I mean, am I totally?
Yeah, no. I mean, of course. I mean, ultimately, I think things come down to money, and that's how politics works.
Yeah.
It sort of depends. I mean, access to capital is still the number one inhibiting factor in the rollout of cannabis in any jurisdiction anywhere in the country, really. Mm-hmm. Given the federal illegality, and it's hard to get traditional loans for this type of business. You might be able to get a mortgage on a property. That's starting to happen more and more. But it's access to capital is one of the hardest parts, and that's why states and safe banking are so important.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think Massachusetts and the commission does want to get it right. They want to create a social equity program that works, that will expunge the records of those who have been, mostly impacted by the war on drugs. And other states are already kind of jumping on that bandwagon too, trying to not only implement those laws, but also to get all those records expunged out of.
Yeah, well, expungement's a big part of this, and so a few years ago now, I think I wrote a little piece in the Globe with Police Chief Carmichael on the other side of it, talking about expungement, and there were a couple expungement bills that were moving through. I mean, I think it should be an automatic expungement. People shouldn't have to go petition. I think the courts should go should go figure out who has, nonviolent, non-distribution, no minors, no other bad things in the police reports that would be a problem, and they should expunge all those cannabis convictions and anybody who's still serving time, whether it's for a probation violation or otherwise due to cannabis, should be let out of custody, and they shouldn't have to go apply for that either. That should just be automatic. And so expungement is a big part of this, and none of the pieces of legislation, even Jalen's, went really that far.
Yeah. And, I know a few of those people still that even though you get your record expunged, can you vote?
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that, actually. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what's up in Mass. I know different states. I mean, in Florida, we saw in the last election cycle that a lot of people had their voting rights restored, felons. I don't know the status of that in Mass. I've never practiced any real.
Yeah. As an attorney, you know where your boundaries are.
Oh, yeah, and I have a lot of them.
Let's talk about the social clubs, because you've seen them work in California.
To some extent, yeah.
What do you think it's going to look like in Massachusetts when we actually see a social club? And, I think you mentioned you hope to see one at least before the end of this year.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
The thing about on-site consumption.
Yes.
It's not a private club.
Yep.
Where you're just letting people in to smoke cannabis.
The Summit Lounge, and they've done a great job out there.
There's some of those private clubs.
Yep.
But when you're talking about a licensed on-site consumption facility, licensed by the Cannabis Control Commission,
yep.
One of the things that we did when we wrote the law is you have that whatever host community that you're going to cite that in has to have its own vote or referendum to decide whether they want to allow that in.
Okay.
And so you're going to have to. I don't know, and right now the Cannabis Control Commission hasn't issued regulations for on-site consumption.
Right. They actually, the latest thing, they've been taking in all their info now, and then they're going to be discussing it over the next couple of weeks, and then having a report and sharing it with the public.
So I think people are going to want to, before you're going to go through the expense of holding a local referendum for the on-site consumption, you're going to want to look at what the Cannabis Control Commission wants that referendum to see. There might be some specifics.
Right.
So I'm hoping in a year from now, we might see one. I don't think there's going to be one open in 2019, though. We're already almost May. And,
I know.
You have the CCC has to finish up their fact finding and their promulgation of the regulations, which has a bunch of notice requirements and all that. And then it would be up to operators to go and do that local referendum vote at the very least, and get the host community agreement, get the rest of the application into the CCC, and then they would have to rule on that. And there'd certainly be a bunch of requests for information. And when they mark it complete, it's going to be another 90 days. So I don't see, and then you would have to actually build out and get open. So I don't see any opening by the end of this year.
Wow, It's just incredible to me. I mean, you've worked so hard to get to this point. And by the way, it happens to be a very social drug. It just has always been it was part of the counterculture when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. It was a way to protest the establishment, a blatant act of civil disobedience. It would be to light up a joint at a ball game in the bleachers of at Fenway Park. I'm going out on a limb thinking that's not news to people, okay? That was around for a long time in the 60s and 70s. And now, of course, if you do it and it's legal, people are still like, "Whoa, do you smell that? You smell that? Somebody's smoking. Somebody's smoking." The steps to becoming the new normal, to acceptance, is still a long way away here.
Well, particularly in Massachusetts. Yeah, that's right. But it's become, like you said, it's becoming more and more accepted. Well, the vote was squeaked by 3 points, but now people are
over
60%.
Yep. And again, education. When you educate yourself about this product, when you look at the science and research that does exist, and a lot of people say, well, we need it to be federally legal before we really get into research. Well, you're going to actually step up the research, but 29,000 studies have been done on cannabis by the substance abuse community to see what kind of bad effects it has. And they really didn't come up with any.
Well, yeah, it's all about education. That's really what I do. I used to have to do more of the actual, grinding lawyer stuff, and I've been fortunate now where I really go to different municipalities and talk to mayors and city councilors and selectmen and planners and police chiefs and whatnot about cannabis and about citing him in those municipalities, and then do get host community agreements, get local permitting, special permit from variances, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. That's really largely what my job is now. We have I think 12 attorneys in the Boston office, and they all help put those pieces together, and I'm fortunate enough where I get to go do the easy part and the fun part, which is talk to all these folks about cannabis.
Is that fun? I mean, you get in the look. I can hit you with the 4 big things on the pushbacks, right? It's a gateway drug. What's your response to that?
Well, it's not. I mean, we know from data out of Colorado, that studies done by the state of Colorado, that adolescent drug use, not just cannabis use, is lower than the national average. And adolescent cannabis use is also lower than the national average. So it's actually an exit drug and not a gateway drug. It's an alternative to opiate, which, being prescribed opiates is what has been killing people, right?
Right.
You prescribed opiates for a bad accident. You become a heroin addict effectively. Your insurance runs up. You're not able to get oxys for free or low cost anymore. You're on the street buying heroin, and then that's when you die.
Right.
Cannabis doesn't bring you there at all. Cannabis, if you medicate with cannabis instead of opiates initially, you're never going to go down that road. And then people use cannabis as an exit drug from opiates. So and the data is there. I mean, the Mass Medical Association the American Medical Association, studied 25% or 24.8, 25% fewer opioid mortalities in medical marijuana jurisdictions, 1,800 fewer pain pills prescribed per doctor per year in marijuana jurisdictions.
How did we get here? The doctors are writing these prescriptions. These are some of the smartest people with degrees, and they're out there writing these prescriptions knowing that they're putting their patients in danger.
Yeah, I mean,
frustrating. I'm a little frustrated about that.
I don't know how off the deep end we want to go on philosophy, and what it takes.
We could go off the deep end, man, because we're in the weeds. We get to do whatever we want.
I mean, it's really a shame. I'm sure not all doctors were doing it for financial interest, but when you have what cannabis needs are these attractive 30 or 35-year-old pharma reps that go around, and that's what the opiate industry has. That's what big pharma has, right? They have these people who go around to doctors' offices and bringing free samples and bringing them out to lunch and calling them thought leaders and sending them to Florida to speak at conventions and whatnot. And so there's a quid pro quo for that, even if it's not direct, right?
Right.
If we wanted to bring cannabis like full circle, and get there like the big pharma has, we would have sort of attractive cannabis reps that would go to doctor's office and say, here's all the reasons why your patient should be on such and such cannabis product for whatever ailment. MS is a great example, right? MS. There's evidence now that cannabis actually slows the progression of the disease.
Yeah.
Biogen drugs don't do that, right? MS does it. Cannabis does it for MS patients. There's MS patients that are off Biogen infusions because they're just medicating with cannabis.
And all the veterans that have been prescribed drugs at the VA, Stephen Mandilli, who was the first guy who bought at Cultivate, was on 17 opioids, 17 drugs that he got off when he started using medical cannabis.
Yeah, that veteran thing is big. Cannabis, C3RN.
Yep. Marion's been here.
Yeah, Marion's organization. They're working with veterans and doing studies and figuring out exactly. Just trying to put the data together. Yep.
Right, and doing a good job. All right, so we hit the old. That was a good.
Gateway drug.
The gateway drug. The kids. Let's talk about the kids. What about the kids? You've already cited one adolescent study. So this is me. I actually preach this on my show on a somewhat regular basis as a parent. This is a great opportunity for parents to have open discussions with their teenagers who are going to try these products, because that is part of the rite of passage of being a teenager. Being told not to do something is pretty much what is the opposite will happen. This is just being part of a teenager. I remember being a teenager, and I remember what I went through. And it gives you an opportunity to talk about all adult use products. And I'm not just talking about alcohol, and I'm not just talking about cannabis. I'm talking about caffeine. I'm talking about nicotine. I'm talking about all the products out there that adults have to learn how to use responsibly on a regular basis, because there is now so much information out there to find. Google knows everything,
Yeah. Google does. Well, I had a buddy of mine send me a fun Venn diagram, 2 circles, but they were barely overlapping, and it was the difference between what's the real facts about cannabis and what you learn in school, right? And the only thing you'll learn in school is that it's called marijuana or something.
Right.
It's
which
like,
we don't even like to use the word anymore,
I know,
especially on this show.
Yeah,
it is
exactly.
cannabis. That's the plant, right?
Yeah. But as far as you hear a lot from because I meet with a lot of police chiefs, and you hear this.
We're going to get into the OUI next.
Yeah, and I might not be able to answer as much of that as we can, but I'll do my best.
That's all right. No, but there isn't much to say about it. Like they haven't figured out how to test for it.
But what are you going to do? What's worse for? If I have kids. Okay, what's worse for kids? To tell them that something that is illegal. To tell them that something that is illegal. Tell them something is illegal, but it's ignored, right? Cannabis is illegal, but everybody's doing it anyway, so you can just ignore all the laws because they don't mean anything, right? Because nobody's getting so the whole point. That's the whole part of taxing and regulating, so you can have these honest conversations with your kids, all right? And get them. I compare it sometimes. I think of it like Italy. Well, I grew up and I spent a lot of time in Italy when I was growing up. My Italian friends who were adolescents didn't drink because you had a glass of wine at dinner with your family when you were growing up.
And the alcoholic rate in Europe is way lower than it is here in the United States.
It's socially accepted, you know. But I would always, I would get boozed because I could, as an adolescent, and so
and as you know, I know you do, that alcohol can kill you, and a lot of these teenagers now drink to get drunk. Period.
Yeah, of course.
Not to get a little buzz, not to relax, not to take stress off from the day, but to get drunk.
And no one's ever died from a cannabis overdose.
Correct.
Ever.
Period. Right. And to me, that is the only argument, especially when you're talking to people that actually do social drinking. Like, oh, but you have no problem getting a couple of glasses of wine in you and getting behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah, I mean, I understand when people say, well, it's the lesser of two evils argument as opposed to like a winning argument, and I get that. Obviously, that's not me. I mean,
I'm
an
evil. It's an adult use product.
Yeah, but if you're gonna, yes, I'm not trying to debate this with you.
Right.
But I understand a parent or somebody who would say, well, all you're doing is saying one evil is a little less evil than another evil, and I can see why people would think that. A lot of the people who are thinking about these, judges and legislators and whatnot, they probably their exposure to cannabis is minimal, right?
Right.
They probably were in college and they drank too much, and somebody was smoking a joint and they smoked it with them, and they had already been boozed from drinking too much, and they're spinning and all messed up, 8 times because they had never smoked before. They smoked once or twice, and that's what they think cannabis does to everybody. Right. And so that's why they're like so sort of, gung ho. That's why they call it an evil or whatever, because they don't really get, how the regular cannabis consumer uses it.
Right. And at night to help sleep, to get rid of
lots of reasons.
To get rid of the, I don't need to show my hands again because I show my hands a lot on my show. I have arthritic hands. Let's go to OUI. Let's talk about operating under the influence, because it is probably one of the biggest challenges facing the cannabis advocacy group, because this stuff stays in your system for 30 days. So exactly, and I know a lot of people that will actually partake behind the wheel of a car because it helps them focus on driving.
Or so they say, but yeah.
Absolutely, and I can say it myself that I tend to hyper-focus. It's what happened to me when I was a teenager because I was ADHD. We didn't even know what it was. And, it just helped me focus because I knew I had to focus. How do you test for it? Obviously, I don't believe when in the Cheech and Chong show, Up in Smoke, where you open up the door and a whole puff of smoke comes out, you should not be behind the wheel of a car. Plus, the edibles and the strength of the new stuff, this new stuff, is very powerful. So how are you going to draw the line between what is a high driver and what is a buzzed driver and what is a too high driver?
Well, I mean, I think it's
going to be a difficult
challenge. First of all, I want to say that as much of a fierce anti-prohibitionist that I am, I don't think people should be driving around stoned. I got to just say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think people should be driving around stoned.
But stoned is different than high.
Yeah, well, I'm using maybe it is, but I don't think people should be under the influence of anything when they're driving. I know a lot of people are. I know, but I don't think people should be. There's just too much at stake for you and the person that you hit, whatever else.
Yeah, but there's actually something that happens in a car more often than smoking or drinking. It's the phones.
Yeah.
And that's by far the biggest distractor that
Of
leads
course.
to accidents, which led to mine about
sorry.
6 weeks ago.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You weren't the
Yeah.
driver. So you don't have to apologize.
No, but
you,
I,
you
know, that's-
understand if driving a car is a responsibility. I totally
Yes.
understand.
I wanted
and
to
respect.
preface it. I want to
Yep.
preface that because I don't want people to think that anything I say is like advocating people saying it's okay to drive around stoned. I've heard that they are developing a couple,
a saliva test.
yeah, a couple tests for quickly figuring out whether you've recently consumed cannabis. I hear they don't actually work very well,
Right.
And then that's why
which is
they're
going to
not
make
rolled
lawyers
out.
great.
I don't know. I mean, we don't do any criminal.
Not
defense
you
in
guys,
our
but
firm.
other.
Yeah.
There were plenty of other out there.
Yeah. I mean, so what it comes down to is, if you read a police report, it will always have, based on the officer's training and experience, they've, observed, the defendant as, or,
Again, you roll down the
yeah.
window and big puffs of smoke come out.
Well, that's different.
Yeah,
but they say you have watery eyes, whatever. I mean, so no one's ever passed a field sobriety test. I mean, it's not like that. The whole point of them is just to get you so that they can question you. It's like
I passed the field sobriety
Is
test.
that right?
And I was
they
under
let
the
you go?
influence of both.
Wow, that's
products.
great. I'm happy to hear that.
And after a meal, and I'd had a little and a little.
Yeah.
And I could
They
do
let
the
you go,
heel.
that's great.
I could heel toe.
As long as you could drive.
I could touch
don't
my,
want you to drive around
and
messed up.
I still pride myself that my biggest problem is when I'm sitting still at lights and stop signs
Yeah.
and yielding, I get hit.
Yeah,
I'm a
sorry.
target. I'm a target. There's a
Yeah.
big target on my head.
What I'm getting.
But let's
at
get
is-
this is an important subject to talk about. I don't mean to make light
Yeah,
of
no,
it.
no. Well, and I don't want people driving. Like I said, I don't want people driving
get
around
you.
under the influence of anything.
Right.
But what I'm getting at is that you still rely on officers' training and experience right now, and you don't have like a really solid field sobriety test. Like a breathalyzer they have for alcohol. We don't have that for cannabis yet. Mm-hmm. And it would. I think you're going through the list. Of major opposition points, right? So gateway drug, kids. Now you're on driving under the influence and how to test for that. And this is one of the things that I hear all the time. I would say that, like I said before, cannabis is everywhere anyway. We're trying to tax and regulate it and educate people on it. The legalization of cannabis or the ending of prohibition in Massachusetts didn't change the laws about driving under the influence.
Right.
So people can still be arrested and charged and convicted and serve custody time for driving under the influence, whether it's cannabis or any other substance. So nothing that we've done has changed any of that. And I don't think it's contributed to it either.
And do you want someone behind the wheel of a car who is high on OxyContin?
Of course not.
heroin?
Nothing.
Exactly right. So how do you test for that too? I mean, there are blood tests that you can do, but how you can't exactly do it fast.
Yeah. Those
There's
don't happen right away.
No prick test yet for that.
Yeah, they don't do blood tests unless you're back at the police station. There's nothing on the side of the road that does a blood test to see
Right.
where you're under the influence or not.
And it's
like
it's a
breathalyzer.
difficult challenge for our law enforcement community. I totally understand that. But it is what it is. And by the way, and I'm going to say it again, I know what my limit is, and I stay within my limit because I really do believe I'm a responsible adult. And I use it medicinally to help me get through chronic pain, actually help you manage the pain that a lot of people who have arthritis or, multiple injuries from whatever, it could be workman's comp. I mean, there's a million things. You could fall off a ladder at work or whatever, and you have chronic pain. You have to deal with it somehow in some way. And if anybody's ever had back pain or nerve pain, you know what a lot of these people have to put up with on a daily basis. And I believe anything that can help them get through the day. Now, can they be functioning adults? Can they get behind the wheel of a car? That's going to be still a judgment call. It just is. And I still maintain it's going to be education so that at least you feel, that, okay, I've had too much. And by the way, I can definitely attest there was a time a few weeks ago at the New England Cannabis Convention, I decided I was not going to drive home and I took an Uber.
Great. That's what I suggest people do.
Right,
Absolutely.
and it's certainly a lot easier to work to do the Uber and Lyft thing now than calling a cab and waiting for them to show up. So
yeah, it's a lot easier than getting an OUI or getting in an accident too.
Exactly right,
Yeah.
100%. Well, great stuff. This was great, Valerio. I mean, I'm trying to think of other things I'd like to talk to you about, but I just think you've done a great job of talking about what you've gone through as someone who's written. You've been in the trenches with I got one for you. The
Sure.
host agreements.
Yeah.
Those backside, wink, wink deals that have happened besides the state tax, local tax, that is already built into the price of the adult use recreational cannabis. And do you believe, and I guess it's human nature more than anything else, when you are a city councilman or you're a town administrator, it gives you a lot of power to dictate what is going on in your community. And you probably get to decide more than what your neighbors all, you said there's a vote, but still, you are a representative of your community. You still have the opportunity to say, you know what, I don't want it in my backyard.
Yeah, so
if I do, I'm going to want something on the side.
I probably negotiated and executed the very first host agreement with Mayor Koch and Quincy for Airmont. That's been open for some years now.
And got sold, too.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it got sold exactly. It
hasn't closed.
Well, that's just not exactly the way these things work, that they get sold, per se. But let's not go down that road. Yeah, we can talk about that after.
All right, I like that. Oh, now another thing to talk about.
But host community agreements, so I probably negotiated, executed the first one and have done scores of them since with other cities and towns around the Commonwealth. Back in the day under medical, they were pretty much what you're describing. I don't think Mayor Koch was being unreasonable. I mean, he's actually one of my favorite mayors and politicians in the Commonwealth. But they were it was graft, right? If cannabis was zoned typically in some industrial park, right? And so, if I'm opening even a dispensary, it's not actually, a dispensary is a commercial or retail activity. It should be zoned in a commercial or retail zone. But they were typically zoned in the back of the industrial parks because our old attorney general scared the heck out of all the cities and towns and said, unless you zone them, they're going to be opened up across the street from your high school and everybody. And so
that horrible video that was produced, anti-question.
The one with Kevin?
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. Anyway, so it's horrible.
Not quite sure it was funny.
I got a kick out of it because it was so bad. But,
it was so bad.
Yeah, but anyway, so these things were zoned in industrial parks, and another use that might go into an industrial park, one that fits, is say an engineering manufacturing firm. Let's say I make ductwork for airports. I'm going to get a tax incentive for my host community. But if I'm opening a cannabis business, I got to pay them 3 points or more off the top, right?
Right.
And this was sort of the standard. And Mayor Koch and I negotiated that, and that's what most people picked up. If you see any host community agreement anywhere in the Commonwealth, it's one that it's a version that I originally wrote for the most part.
Yeah.
Then when after question 4, when the Mass Legislature was sort of rewriting it and adopting it and fiddling with it, Dave Rogers, who's the state rep out of Cambridge, he would call me and we would talk about host community agreements. And so they legislated them. And so they cap at 3%. They expire after 5 years. And the money should be used, with some nexus to the harms of the use. Now, you and I probably don't think there's a lot of harms for the use, but the host communities. And so this is the legislation that went through. So it legalized what before was the graft. So now it's legislated that you can enter into these host community agreements. Communities don't have to have a financial component to the host community agreement, but in order to apply it to Cannabis Control Commission, you have to have executed one with the host community, and you have to get a one-page certification form saying that you did and submit that as part of your application. Now, the thing that the host community agreements are turning into, this was your question, they were not intended, and there's a lot of talk about legislative intent when you're trying to figure out what legislation does. They were not intended, and I know this because I was in the room and helped draft this stuff and then talked to Dave Rogers about it afterwards. They were not intended to be a method of prohibiting the use. They were supposed to be a contract between the host community and the developer, the operator, the cannabis business owner, whatever you want to call it, as to what thing, preferential local hiring, full transparency with law enforcement, some percentage of revenue going back to the host community, working with substance abuse counseling and whatnot in the host community, traffic, parking, other things that might not have a special permit process. All those things, that's what the host community agreement was for. It was not supposed to be a method of prohibiting these. And you see there's a case in Salem right now where Salem had a backwards process and they gave out special permits. And actually that special permit that we got a bunch of them in Salem. And then they sent you to the host community agreement. So you have a properly zoned property, a special permit to operate that license that business with a state legal business, and they're going to deny you because of this legislated graft. And that's not what it was for. And hopefully, so the Cannabis Control Commission has been struggling with whether they should be involved in these host community agreement, in the business of them at all.
Right.
And so they've been going back and forth on that. And apparently they've asked the legislature for some more authority to do that. I don't know how that's going to turn out. But anyway, that's sort of the 101 on host community agreements. And you need them in order to apply.
And you're trying to create a win-win for a local town or city because there's opportunities to actually take money back. Think about it, especially in education. We need more. We certainly need to, I think, pay our teachers more and put more money into real life education. Don't get me started on it because I'll go off.
Well, I think so too.
Yeah,
but the thing is that there aren't the margins that people think, right? These cities and towns say, oh, I'm going to have a cannabis business in the city and town so I can ask for all the money in the world and I can get all these things that I want. The margins aren't really there until we fix 280E, the federal prohibition and the IRS code on deducting anything but cost of goods sold from your regular business expenses, because the effective tax rate on these businesses can well exceed 50-60%, right? And then, you got 6.25% on local regular sales tax, another 10.75, another 3 points to the host community, another 3 points via the host community fee. Plus you're paying 60% in your effective tax rate to IRS, state taxes. There's just no money left for the operators. So once 280 gets fixed, there'll be more money for these host communities. But yes, I think the ones, particularly in this sort of progressive Puritan state that we live in and the jurisdictions that we have, the cities and towns that are jumping on this opportunity and allowing these businesses in are making the right choice. And I think we should encourage them to do that. And despite the fact that it's ultimately what I think is legislated graft, I think they're a necessary evil. And I'm happy to give that 3 points or for cultivation and processing, it should be closer to a point and a half on the outside off the top. But I'm happy to give that up to the host community to be able to cite these businesses because that's just sort of the world that we live in.
Yeah. I wrote down sold. What is a sale and what is not a sale?
Well,
what is reported as a sale?
Well, these licenses are non-transferable, right? And without the permission of the Cannabis Control Commission. And now they're starting to actually do license transfers with the entity to brand new entities taking over the license. That's just finally starting to happen. But the licenses
is that what happened with Netta?
That's what may happen with Netta. I don't know if it ever went through. Netta's not one of our clients.
Yeah. Okay. That's right.
Yeah. So that's actually transferring the license from one entity to another. And so that was, just from Airmont still holds that license. So that's not what happened, and there's so much focus right now from the Globe and Dan Adams on these multi-state operators participating.
They're pushing the limits on their they're supposed to only have 3.
And none of them have more than 3. And, these whether it's a consulting agreement or a loan agreement or a supply agreement or, providing, like technology services, whatever it is, these are all fair transactions. None of these multi-state operators are trying to or are controlling more than 3. Frankly, the Globe reporting on this, it's a very complicated issue. And so the Globe reporting on this hasn't been entirely accurate. They were relying on antiquated information that was provided to the Department of Public Health and doesn't actually correspond to what's really going on now. And so none of these MSOs are really controlling more than 3 or even really trying to because they don't want to lose the 3 that they have.
That's a multi-state
operator, right? So
operator.
None of them are really doing that. It's just, I don't want to call it bad reporting because the Globe is like the best paper in the Commonwealth.
Right.
It really is. I mean, but it's a very complicated issue, But I do think, on this topic, social equity is a big part of this, right? Fixing the communities or helping individuals and communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, right?
Yep.
And so if it costs me, let's say I'm opening just a product manufacturing, right? Just so I'm depending on what extraction type I'm going to use. Let's call it $100,000 for extraction equipment. It could be less, rosin press, but you're not going to make a lot. It could be a lot more. It could be $300,000-$400,000, CO2 or whatever.
Right.
Then I got to get a special permit. From my host community. So that means I need an architect's stamp or an engineer. So that's probably another $30,000-$40,000 to actually get my special permit. Then I need to install security, right? Because I'm going to need a vault. I'm going to need cameras. I'm going to need backup. I'm going to need, servers. I'm going to need that stuff. another 7,500 grand. So now I'm basically at 200, 250. Then I got to carry my property, right? So, property carrying costs, I don't know, a minimum of, 2,000 a month, minimum, 2,000 a month. So 25 grand a year. So I'm at 250, 275. Then I actually have to have employees. I got to pay them. Let's say it's only 2 or 3 people to run a small extraction lab and a commercial kitchen and build out your kitchen and all that.
Right.
You hire those people. Now I'm at, 350 in the first 6 months of operating. I haven't even bought any of the flour that I need at that $4 grand a pound, any of the trim I need at $1,500 a pound. So now I'm at, $500,000, very least, to get open for product manufacturing in the Commonwealth, just to be able to create some cookies with your branding on them, assuming that you're going to do the extraction yourself. $500,000. So or, God forbid, if we're talking about a 5,000 square foot grow, that's $1 million plus to build out easy all day long, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, in this, that the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, typically that cash is not there, right? The people in those communities that the social equity program is meant for aren't ones that are sitting on $1 million in discretionary cash to open up one of these businesses, or 8 million or 10 or whatever,
or even be able to go to a bank and get a short loan to get it
going.
Well,
the banks wouldn't even do it.
Right.
So what I'm getting at is this goes back to the MSOs, the multi-state operator issue, and the social equity and the Globe. There's just it's like there's this sort of hit piece on all these multi-state operators that keeps coming out of the Globe, and it's almost like there's 2 schools of thought, right? Anybody with money is bad, and we have to make sure that people without money can get into this process. But there's no way most people are going to even be able to pay for the security, right? I mean, most people don't even have the 75 grand to build a security system out in cash sitting around, no less the $500,000 that I talked about for one of the smallest, most efficient, cheapest type of businesses to open. So what I really think needs to happen with the multi-state operators and with cash coming in, we need to make sure that these transactions are fair, that no one's taking advantage of the smaller operator that's from one of these disproportionately impacted communities. But this cash is coming in from around the country that is trying to get there. That doesn't mean they're trying to have control over more than 3. They're trying to participate and help this business. And if it's fair and everybody makes a fair return, then I think it's a good thing, because otherwise we're never going to get these social equity applicants through the process.
Right.
There's only going to be a couple of them for the next bunch of years. And this is a fundamental problem with the way that both the reporting is and the people who are approaching this industry in Massachusetts are looking at it. It's like this. It's adversarial almost between operators with cash who operate throughout the country and folks who have no money, who are seeking money. It doesn't have to be adversarial, and so I hope that the Globe's thinking can evolve on that issue so that we can make sure that the reporting is fair and we get the money into the Commonwealth that we need to have so that we can have these social equity applicants actually get money and get open.
Yeah.
Well, I went off on that tangent.
That was
but
great.
That's a really important part of this whole thing for me.
And I hear you, and I can hear the passion in your voice for this too. So I respect that a lot. I think it's great. The big sale that happened last week with a little caveat that it'll go through when it's federally legal between Acreage Holdings and Canopy. Yep, $3.4 billion, but it doesn't really. You're not going to see any of this money right away. I mean, that's a huge deal, and it's all contingent on the cannabis becoming federally legal. And
I think that we feel pretty good about States Act going through in the next year or so. So. I mean, I don't want to get too much more into that because of client confidentiality and all the other stuff. But we feel pretty good about federal legalization.
Great. All right. And let me ask you a question, because MJ Intel, one of the newsletters I get, predicted it won't happen until 2023.
I don't know where that came from. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know how long ago that was. But
I literally read it last week. They said Mexico in 2019. They picked Uruguay.
Uruguay's big, yeah.
Yeah.
Already, yeah.
And I think the next one, New Zealand, is going to be the next one.
I don't know why ours would take another 4 years, but
you never know.
Yeah, we have economists and policy arm and attorneys who are really focused and understand the federal legalization landscape and understand exactly what's going on in Washington with all of the different legislators. And I'm not that person, you know. So yeah, but from speaking with them, I don't hear 4 years. I hear 18 months.
Right, 18 months.
Yeah, or less.
Wow. So let's see. That's around the election, or no, I don't even want to get into that. Let's just say, and you mentioned his name once. We usually do not allow his name to be mentioned. We call him POTUS because of that.
Okay, excuse me. You can feel free to edit it.
That's how I know. I'm not going to edit. I'm only kidding. I'm only giving you a hard time just because I so enjoyed our conversation over the last hour, by the way.
Has it been an hour already?
And it flew by. And I really appreciate the fact that you enlightened me on a lot of these issues,
too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because this is one of the best things that's ever happened to me, that I can bring in people and have these kinds of conversations with them. And I don't know everything, nor have I ever pretended that I know, but I think I know enough to ask good questions.
Oh yeah, this has been great. I've really enjoyed myself as well.
And that's what I kind of pride myself on. So Valerio Romano, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jimmy,
for coming in today. I really do on a Friday afternoon. You know, the traffic's always bad, but I do appreciate you making the effort. And Steve, thank you for pushing the buttons as usual, Mr. Helmuth. And let me just think, did somebody I know get TV Student of the Year at Curry College? Did I hear that earlier today?
Congratulations, Steve.
And no more deserving person as far as I'm concerned. He's already got a job at Fox 25 as a production assistant. He hasn't even graduated college yet, right?
That's great.
There's going to be a bidding war for his services. He doesn't know that yet, but he probably will need some representation. Anyway, Joyce Gerber is the executive producer of this, and I really do appreciate, Valerio, again, you coming in, and we will be keeping an eye on what goes on in the world of cannabis, because as you know, it's a whole new world of weed out there. We'll see you next time on In the Weeds.